Kristi Noem made her first mistake when she agreed to testify before Congress. Her second mistake was calling Jasmine Crockett just another coastal elite who doesn't understand border security. Her third mistake was saying it while running the Department of Homeland Security, after shooting her puppy to prove she was tough enough for the job. What happened next would break congressional YouTube records, make Crockett trend for 72 hours straight, and prove that calling a former public defender coastal elite when you're a puppy-killing cabinet secretary is not a confirmation strategy, it's a resignation letter. Comment, Crockett, if you've ever watched someone insult you right before you ended their entire career. The Homeland is about to get very insecure. The House Committee on Homeland Security hearing room was packed to capacity. Every seat was filled, cameras were positioned perfectly, and staffers lined the walls. This was supposed to be a routine oversight hearing on border security and immigration enforcement with the newly confirmed Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem. Noem had been confirmed just 6 weeks earlier in a contentious Senate vote. The puppy story, the one where she'd written in her memoir about shooting her 14-month-old dog, Crockett, in a gravel pit because it was untrainable, had dominated the confirmation hearings. Republicans had defended her as tough on security. Democrats had called her cruel and unqualified. She'd been confirmed 51-49, the narrowest margin for a DHS secretary in history. And now she sat before the House committee for her first major congressional testimony. Noem looked exactly like someone who'd spent 2 hours in hair and makeup before a hearing. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her outfit carefully chosen to project authority and approachability in equal measure. She'd brought a small team of handlers who sat behind her, ready to pass notes and provide cover. Representative Jasmine Crockett sat 3 seats down from the chairman, a legal pad in front of her, a pen in her hand, and an expression that anyone who'd ever been cross-examined by her would recognize immediately. She was taking notes, lots of notes. Chairman Mark Green called the hearing to order and delivered his opening statement, a word salad about border security and the importance of strong leadership. Then he turned to Noem for her opening statement. Noem smiled warmly at the camera. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's an honor to be here today to discuss the vital work the Department of Homeland Security is doing to protect the American people." She launched into her prepared remarks, tough on the border, supporting law enforcement, keeping America safe, all the greatest hits. Her tone was confident, practiced, the voice of someone who'd given this speech 100 times. Then she went off script. "You know, Mr. Chairman, I think there's sometimes a disconnect between those of us who understand real security challenges and folks who've spent their whole lives in coastal cities." She glanced down the table. "No offense to my friends from places like Dallas, but border security isn't something you can understand from a law office. It requires toughness, real-world experience, the ability to make hard decisions." She said it with a smile, but the condescension was unmistakable. Dallas. Coastal city. Law office. Jasmine Crockett set down her pen very deliberately. She looked at Noem for a long moment, then at Chairman Green. "Mr. Chairman, I'd like to reserve my questioning time until the end. I have quite a lot to discuss with the Secretary." Green nodded, looking vaguely uncomfortable. He'd seen that expression before. The other committee members went through their rounds of questioning, softballs from Republicans about how wonderful she was doing, pointed questions from Democrats about her qualifications, which she deflected with practiced ease. And then it was Jasmine Crockett's turn. She smiled at Noem. Not a friendly smile, a prosecutor's smile. "Secretary Noem, thank you for being here today. I want to follow up on something you said in your opening statement. You mentioned that people from coastal cities, like Dallas, don't understand real security challenges." Noem's smile tightened slightly. "I simply meant Dallas is 800 miles from the nearest coast, Madam Secretary," Crockett interrupted calmly. "But that's fine. Geography isn't everyone's strength. Let's talk about qualifications instead. Specifically, your qualifications to run the Department of Homeland Security." She opened a folder. "You were governor of South Dakota. Population about 900,000. That's roughly the same as Austin, Texas. One city. And now you're responsible for the security of 333 million Americans." Crockett pulled out a document. "But I'm less interested in the size difference and more interested in your actual national security experience. Can you walk the committee through your background in Homeland Security, intelligence operations, or federal law enforcement prior to this appointment. Noem shifted in her seat. I bring executive leadership experience. That's not what I asked, Crockett cut in. National security experience. Intelligence experience. Federal law enforcement experience. Do you have any? She didn't wait for an answer. I served on the House Armed Services Committee for 2 years, a decade ago, before you became governor. Crockett had pulled out Noem's congressional record. And during those 2 years, you missed 47% of Armed Services Committee hearings. So let's be clear, you have essentially no national security experience, no intelligence background, and no federal law enforcement credentials. She looked up. So I'm curious, Madam Secretary, what qualified you for this position? What made President Trump think you were the right person to protect the homeland? Noem's voice was defensive now. The president valued my executive experience and my record of making tough decisions. Ah, yes. Tough decisions. Crockett pulled out another document. Let's discuss those. Specifically, let's talk about cricket. The room went completely silent. Comment, Cricket, if you think we should discuss the Secretary's qualifications for protecting animals, let alone humans. Noem's face had gone pale. Her handlers were frantically texting. This was not supposed to happen. They'd been told the Democrats might bring up the puppy, but they'd assumed it would be a glancing reference, easily deflected. Jasmine Crockett was not glancing. She pulled out a copy of Noem's memoir and held it up to the camera. For those watching who might not be familiar, Secretary Noem wrote a book. In that book, she describes shooting her 14-month-old puppy, Cricket, because, and I'm quoting here, the dog was untrainable and had aggressive behavior. She set the book down and pulled out veterinary guidelines. Now, Madam Secretary, I'm not a dog trainer, but I consulted with several professional dog trainers before this hearing. They all told me the same thing: 14 months is barely past puppyhood. It's the teenage phase. Most behavioral issues at that age can be corrected with proper training. She read from an expert statement. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, certified animal behaviorist, reviewed your description of Cricket's behavior. Her assessment, nothing described suggests aggression requiring euthanasia. This sounds like a young dog with insufficient training and socialization. These issues are correctable. Crockett looked up at Noem. Did you try professional training, Madam Secretary? Noem stammered, the dog was a working dog that couldn't do the job. Did you try professional training? Yes or no? I made the decision that was right for my family. That's not an answer. Did you try professional training before shooting a 14-month-old puppy? Silence. The answer is no, you didn't. Crockett pulled out another document. You also didn't try to rehome the dog. You didn't contact a rescue organization. You didn't consult a veterinarian about behavioral medications. You didn't do any of the things that responsible dog owners do when they have a difficult animal. She leaned forward. You just took her to a gravel pit and shot her. And then you wrote about it in your book. You were proud of it. You thought it showed you were tough. Noem tried to rally. It was a difficult decision. It was an easy decision for someone who values cruelty over compassion. And it gets worse. Crockett flipped pages. Because you didn't just kill Cricket that day. You also killed your family's goat. She read from the memoir. Quote, I hated that goat. He was nasty and mean. He stank and he just tried to bite me. So I took him to the gravel pit, too. End quote. Crockett set the book down. You killed your family's goat because it smelled bad and tried to bite you. Not attacked you. Tried to bite you. That was your threshold for execution, bad smell and an attempted bite. She pulled out her questioning notepad. Madam Secretary, you now run the Department of Homeland Security. You're responsible for protecting 333 million Americans. You oversee immigration enforcement, border security, cybersecurity, disaster response, and the Secret Service. She looked directly at Noem. If you couldn't handle a difficult puppy without killing it, how are we supposed to trust you with the homeland? The gallery erupted. Republicans tried to object. Chairman Green banged his gavel, but Crockett wasn't done. You know what I did before Congress. I was a public defender. I represented people who couldn't afford lawyers. Some of them were difficult. Some of them were aggressive. Some of them had behavioral issues. But I didn't shoot them, Madam Secretary. I helped them. Her voice got harder. That's the difference between us. You see something difficult and you kill it. I see something difficult and I try to fix it. You call that toughness. I call it cruelty. And the American people are supposed to feel safe with you in charge of Homeland Security. She gathered her documents. You shot a puppy to prove you were tough enough for a job you weren't qualified for. And it worked, because here you are, running Homeland Security with no experience, no expertise, and a gravel pit full of dead animals as your resume. Noem's voice was shaking. Representative, I resent. I don't care what you resent. I care about competence. And shooting puppies isn't a qualification. It's a disqualification. Crockett closed the first folder. Share this if you think protecting the homeland requires more than proving you can shoot defenseless animals. Noem was visibly rattled now, her composure cracking. Her handlers were passing her notes, but she wasn't reading them. She was staring at Crockett with something between anger and fear. Crockett opened her second folder, and when she spoke, her tone had shifted, less prosecutorial anger, more genuine confusion. Madam Secretary, I want to discuss your book some more, because the puppy story isn't the only concerning thing in it. She pulled out the memoir again, flagged with multiple bookmarks. You wrote that you met Kim Jong-un, North Korea's dictator. You described the meeting in detail, made yourself sound very important, very connected, very experienced in international diplomacy. Crockett looked up. There's just one problem. It never happened. She pulled out the publisher's correction notice. Your publisher, Hatchet, had to issue a correction and remove that passage from subsequent printings because, and I'm quoting from their statement, this passage was included in error. In error? That's a very polite way of saying you lied. Noem started to speak. Crockett held up a hand. Oh, but it gets better. You also claimed French President Emmanuel Macron cancelled a meeting with you. Also false. Macron's office confirmed no such meeting was ever scheduled. She spread out fact-check articles. The Washington Post fact-checked your book. PolitiFact fact-checked your book. Multiple outlets found significant fabrications throughout. You invented diplomatic meetings. You exaggerated your role in events. You made yourself sound far more important and experienced than you actually were. Crockett pulled out her legal pad. Here's my question, Madam Secretary. You now hold a position that requires a top-secret security clearance. You have access to classified intelligence. You brief the president on national security threats. You coordinate with foreign intelligence agencies. She looked directly at Noem. How did someone who fabricates meetings with foreign leaders get a security clearance? Because one of the first questions in the clearance process is, have you ever lied on an official document or in official statements? And your book, full of lies, is pretty official. Noem's face was red. Those were mistakes in the editing process. Mistakes. You accidentally wrote detailed descriptions of meetings that never happened. You accidentally invented conversations with world leaders. You accidentally fabricated your entire diplomatic experience. Crockett pulled out the security clearance questionnaire. Did you disclose these mistakes when you applied for your security clearance? I don't discuss my security clearance process. That's not a denial. That's an evasion. Crockett leaned back. Let me tell you what I think happened. I think you lied in your book to sound important. I think you wanted people to believe you had international experience you didn't have. I think you fabricated meetings to build yourself up. She paused. And now you have access to actual classified information, real intelligence, genuine national security secrets. And we're supposed to trust that someone who lies about meeting dictators won't lie about what those dictators are actually doing. She pulled out congressional testimony guidelines. Madam Secretary, you're under oath right now. So let me ask you directly, have you ever had any in-person meeting with Kim Jong-un? Noem hesitated. No. Have you ever had any scheduled meeting with Emmanuel Macron that was cancelled? No. Did you fabricate those stories to make yourself sound more qualified for national office? Silence. Answer the question, Madam Secretary. You're under oath. Noem's lawyer whispered something to her. She leaned into the microphone. I defer to the published corrections from my publisher. That's not an answer. That's a lawyer telling you not to commit perjury on top of everything else. Crockett gathered the documents. You lied in your book. Your publisher had to issue corrections. And now you run Homeland Security with access to the most sensitive intelligence in the world. Her voice was hard as steel. The American people deserve better than a Homeland Security secretary who can't tell the truth about her own resume. If you lie about meeting Kim Jong-un, what else will you lie about? Threats? Intelligence? Security breaches? She closed the second folder with force. Tag someone who thinks national security requires honesty, not fantasy meetings with dictators. Chairman Green tried to call for a recess. Noem's team desperately wanted a break, but the minority members objected, and parliamentary procedure meant Crockett still had time. She opened the third folder, and this time her expression was something different, not anger, not confusion, disgust. Madam Secretary, let's talk about borders. Specifically, your relationship with borders. She pulled out official documents. You're the Secretary of Homeland Security. You oversee customs and border protection. You're responsible for securing America's borders. You give speeches about border security constantly. It's basically your whole job. Crockett looked up. So, I find it fascinating that you are currently banned from crossing multiple borders in your own former state. She held up official exclusion orders. The Oglala Sioux Tribe. The Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe. The Standing Rock Sioux Tribe. The Rosebud Sioux Tribe. 4 sovereign nations have issued formal orders banning you from entering their territories. She read from one of the orders. Quote, due to Governor Noem's continued inflammatory and unsubstantiated accusations against tribal nations and their leaders, she is hereby excluded from the Oglala Sioux Tribe's territory. This order was issued in 2019 and remains in effect. Crockett pulled out more documents. In total, you've been banned from 5 tribal reservations. That's 20% of South Dakota's land area. You literally cannot visit 20% of the state you governed. She pulled out Noem's own statements. And why were you banned? Because you accused tribal leaders of conspiring with drug cartels. Direct quote, tribal leaders should be personally responsible for the cartels operating on their reservations. You provided 0 evidence for this claim. 0. Another document. You called tribal governments safe havens for criminals. You suggested they were complicit in drug trafficking. You made these accusations publicly, repeatedly, without a shred of proof. Crockett looked directly at Noem. The Oglala Sioux Nation asked you to apologize. You refused. Standing Rock asked you to meet with tribal leadership to discuss your concerns. You refused. Rosebud asked you to provide evidence for your accusations. You refused. She spread the exclusion orders across the table. So they banned you. 4 sovereign nations looked at your behavior and said, you are not welcome here. You may not cross our borders. And those bans remain in effect today. She leaned forward. Madam Secretary, you run customs and border protection. You oversee border security for the entire United States. You give speeches about securing America's borders and respecting sovereignty. Her voice dripped with irony. But you can't cross the borders of tribal nations in South Dakota because you attacked them without evidence and refused to apologize. You're banned from borders while running border security. She pulled out a map showing the tribal reservations. Pine Ridge Reservation, you can't go there. Cheyenne River Reservation, you can't go there. Standing Rock, Rosebud, Yankton, all banned. You are literally prohibited from visiting sovereign territory because of your own actions. Crockett's voice got harder. Let me tell you what I find most offensive about this. These aren't abstract borders. These are communities. Real people. American citizens living on tribal lands. And you attack them. She pulled out statistics. South Dakota has the second largest Native American population by percentage of any state. The missing and murdered Indigenous women crisis is devastating tribal communities. Poverty rates on reservations are among the highest in the nation. Healthcare access is abysmal. She looked at Noem. And when you were governor, what did you do? Did you address these crises? Did you work with tribal leadership? Did you provide resources and support? She answered her own question. No. You accused them of harboring cartels. You called their leaders criminals. You attacked them publicly and refused to engage with them privately. And now you can't set foot in their communities. Crockett gathered the exclusion orders. You're not securing borders, Madam Secretary. You're collecting bans from crossing them. You're not building relationships with sovereign nations. You're burning bridges with American citizens. Her final words cut like knives. The Secretary of Homeland Security is banned from entering sovereign U.S. territory because she attacked American citizens with racist conspiracy theories. That's not leadership. That's just racism with a government title. She closed the third folder. Comment if you think the Secretary of Homeland Security should be able to visit all Americans, not just the ones who look like her. The hearing room was in chaos. Republican members were objecting. Democratic members were calling for order. The gallery was buzzing. C-SPAN's viewership had quadrupled in the last 20 minutes. And Jasmine Crockett still had 4 more folders. She opened the 4th one, and her expression had shifted again. No longer disgust. Now it was something colder, the look of someone about to discuss death. Madam Secretary, let's talk about your record of protecting people. Specifically, your COVID response as governor of South Dakota. She pulled out public health data. South Dakota, under your leadership, had some of the highest COVID death rates in the nation. Particularly devastating was the death rate in nursing homes. She held up the data. According to the CDC, South Dakota had the highest nursing home death rate per capita in the entire United States during the peak of the pandemic. The highest. Number 1. Congratulations. Crockett pulled out Noem's own statements from 2020. You refused to implement mask mandates. You refused to close indoor dining. You refused to limit gatherings. You called it freedom. You said South Dakotans should be trusted to make their own decisions. She pulled out photos from the Sturgis motorcycle rally. In August 2020, at the height of the pandemic, you welcomed 500,000 motorcyclists to the Sturgis rally. No restrictions, no requirements. Just freedom. Another document. The CDC later traced over 400 COVID cases directly to the Sturgis rally. Those cases spread to dozens of states. Multiple people died. And you called it a success. Crockett's voice was shaking now with controlled fury. Meanwhile, elderly South Dakotans were dying in nursing homes at the highest rate in America. They didn't get freedom, Madam Secretary. They got death. She pulled out heartbreaking stories. Marjorie Henderson, 83 years old, died in a Sioux Falls nursing home in November 2020. Her family couldn't visit her because of pandemic restrictions, but the facility didn't have adequate PPE or staffing because you refused to mandate protections or provide resources. Another story. Robert Klein, 77, Korean War veteran, died in a Rapid City Care facility. His daughter testified that staff weren't wearing masks consistently because there was no requirement to do so. Crockett set down the stories. You touted freedom while people died. You promoted rallies while nursing homes became death traps. You prioritized your political brand over public health. She pulled out a comparison chart. States with strong mask mandates and business restrictions, lower death rates. States with weak or no mandates, higher death rates. The data is clear. Your freedom approach killed people. She looked directly at Noem. And now you're Secretary of Homeland Security. You're responsible for FEMA, for disaster response, for protecting Americans during emergencies. Her voice got quiet and deadly. But your record shows that when Americans needed protection, you chose politics over lives. When elderly people needed safety, you chose rallies. When nursing home residents needed support, you chose your brand. Crockett gathered the COVID data. The Department of Homeland Security's mission is to protect the American people. But you've already shown us what your version of protection looks like. It looks like the highest nursing home death rate in America. It looks like freedom to die while you take photos with bikers. She closed the 4th folder. Madam Secretary, if you couldn't protect nursing home residents in South Dakota, Why should Americans trust you to protect the entire homeland? The question hung in the air. Noem had no answer. Type 246 if you remember when Homeland Security meant actually protecting people, not just talking about freedom while they die. Noem looked like she'd been hit by a truck. Her carefully styled hair was starting to come loose. Her makeup couldn't hide the stress in her face. Her handlers had given up trying to pass notes. She wasn't reading them anyway. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't done. She opened the fifth folder, and this time her voice carried a different edge: personal offense. Madam Secretary, I want to discuss ethics. Specifically, your ethics, or lack thereof. She pulled out official state documents. When you were governor of South Dakota, your daughter, Cassidy Peters, applied for a real estate appraiser license. The application had problems. The state's appraiser certification program found deficiencies in her qualifications. Crockett read from the documents. She was on track to be denied. A normal applicant would have to remediate those deficiencies or reapply. But your daughter isn't a normal applicant. She's the governor's daughter. She pulled out meeting records. On July 27, 2020, you called a meeting in your office. Attendees included you, your daughter, and Sherry Bren, the director of South Dakota's appraiser certification program. Crockett looked up. That meeting was highly unusual. Governors don't typically involve themselves in individual licensing decisions. But you did. And shortly after that meeting, your daughter's application was approved. She pulled out whistleblower testimony. Sherry Bren later testified under oath that she felt pressured to approve the license. Quote, I felt I had no choice. The governor was directly involved. She made it clear that approval was expected. Another document. 6 months later, Sherry Bren was pushed out of her job. The state called it retirement. She called it forced. And then the state paid her $200,000 to go away quietly. Crockett set down the settlement agreement. $200,000 taxpayer dollars to silence a state employee who wouldn't rubber stamp your daughter's license. She pulled out the ethics complaint. A formal ethics complaint was filed. You stonewalled the investigation. You refused to testify. You blocked document requests. You used executive privilege to hide your communications. She looked at Noem. That's textbook corruption, Madam Secretary. You used your office to benefit your family. You pressured a state employee to approve your daughter's license. When she resisted, she was forced out and paid off with taxpayer money. And then you obstructed the investigation. Crockett pulled out federal ethics guidelines. You now work in the federal government. You're subject to federal ethics rules. Those rules prohibit using your position for personal gain or to benefit family members. She leaned forward. But you've already shown us you don't care about ethics rules. You broke them as governor. You used your power to help your daughter cheat the system. Why should we believe you'll follow federal ethics rules? She pulled out the DHS budget. The Department of Homeland Security has a budget of over $90 billion. Billion. You oversee contracts worth billions. You make decisions about grants, funding, procurement. Her voice was hard. Who's watching you now, Madam Secretary? Who's making sure you're not using your federal position the way you used your state position? Who's protecting taxpayers from your corruption? Noem tried to respond. That matter was resolved. It was buried, not resolved. You paid someone $200,000 to stop talking about it. That's not resolution. That's a cover-up. Crockett gathered the ethics documents. You used your office as governor to help your daughter. You pressured a state employee. You paid her off when she complained. You obstructed the investigation. And now you want us to trust you with $90 billion and the security of the nation. She shook her head. The American people deserve a Homeland Security Secretary who understands ethics, who follows the rules, who doesn't use their position to benefit their family. She closed the fifth folder. You're not that person. You've already proven it. Share this if you think Cabinet Secretary should follow ethics rules, not just ignore them. The hearing had been going for nearly 2 hours. Noem looked destroyed. Her team was frantically typing talking points for cleanup. Republican members were planning their defense, But none of it mattered because Jasmine Crockett had 2 more folders. She opened the 6th one, and when she spoke, her voice carried a mix of pity and contempt. "Madam Secretary, let's talk about why you're really here. Why you got this job. Why the president chose you for Homeland Security despite having no qualifications, no experience, and a resume that includes puppy execution and fabricated meetings with dictators." She pulled out Trump campaign coverage from 2024. "You wanted to be vice president. Desperately. Every decision you made as governor was calibrated to impress one person, Donald Trump." Crockett read from news articles. "You were one of the first governors to refuse COVID restrictions to impress Trump. You banned transgender athletes even though South Dakota had exactly 1 trans athlete in school sports, to impress Trump. You attacked critical race theory even though it wasn't being taught in South Dakota schools, to impress Trump." She pulled out the memoir. "And then you wrote this book, full of stories designed to make you look tough, experienced, ready for national office. The Kim Jong-un lie to seem worldly. The Macron story to seem important." She held up the book. "And the puppy story, Cricket. You shot your dog and wrote about it because you thought it would prove you were tough enough to be vice president." Crockett looked at Noem. "You thought Donald Trump would read about you executing a puppy and think, now that's leadership. That's who I want 1 heartbeat away from the presidency." She set the book down. But it backfired catastrophically. The puppy story went viral for all the wrong reasons. Animal rights groups protested. Even Republicans were horrified. Trump's team leaked that he was furious about the bad press. She pulled out VP speculation articles. "You went from VP frontrunner to political liability overnight, because you shot a puppy and bragged about it in print." Crockett pulled out the announcement of J.D. Vance as VP pick. "And Trump picked someone else. After all your auditioning, all your performing, all your cruelty designed to impress him, he chose J.D. Vance. You didn't even make the short list anymore. The puppy story killed your chances." She leaned back. "But Trump is a generous man to his loyalists. So when he won, he gave you a consolation prize. Not vice president, but a cabinet position. Homeland Security. A job you're completely unqualified for." Crockett pulled out Noem's confirmation hearing testimony. "You couldn't answer basic questions about cybersecurity. You didn't know FEMA's budget. You couldn't name the 5 mission areas of DHS. You had no experience in intelligence, law enforcement, or national security." She held up the confirmation vote record. "You were confirmed 51-49, the narrowest margin in DHS history. Even some Republicans voted against you. But Trump's pressure was enough." Crockett's voice was scathing now. "So, here you are, Secretary of Homeland Security. Not because you're qualified. Not because you're competent. Not because you're the best person for the job." She paused. "But because you shot a puppy to impress Donald Trump, it backfired, and this job is your consolation prize for failing the audition." She gathered the documents. "The Department of Homeland Security isn't a participation trophy, Madam Secretary. It's not a consolation prize for VP wannabes. It's not where failed politicians go to feel important." Her voice rose. "It's the agency responsible for protecting 333 million Americans from terrorism, disasters, cyber attacks, and threats we can't even imagine yet. And you're running it because you're loyal to Trump, not because you're remotely qualified." She closed the 6th folder. "That's not Homeland Security. That's just nepotism on a national scale. Comment, audition fail, if you think cabinet positions should go to qualified people, not puppy killers who impress the president." 1 folder left. The hearing room was dead silent. Even the Republican members had stopped trying to defend Noem. There was nothing left to defend. She sat rigid in her chair, her face ashen, looking like someone waiting for the final blow. Jasmine Crockett opened the 7th folder slowly, but she didn't pull out any documents immediately. She just looked at Kristi Noem for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was different. Quieter. No performance, no rhetoric. Just simple, devastating truth. "Madam Secretary, I have one question for you." She paused. "Who is protecting the homeland from you?" Noem looked confused. "I'm serious. Who's protecting Americans from your incompetence?" Your cruelty. Your corruption. Your lies. Crockett pulled out the DHS mission statement. The Department of Homeland Security's mission is to safeguard the American people, our homeland, and our values. Let's examine how you've done at each of those. She pulled out her notes. Safeguarding American people, your COVID response as governor led to the highest nursing home death rate in America. You chose politics over protection. You chose rallies over lives. Hundreds of elderly people died on your watch. Another note. Safeguarding the homeland, you have no national security experience. You lied about meeting foreign leaders. You can't be trusted with intelligence because you fabricate your own credentials. You're banned from visiting sovereign U.S. territory because you attacked tribal nations with racist conspiracy theories. Another note. Safeguarding our values, you shot a puppy because it was difficult. You killed a goat because it smelled bad. You used your office to corrupt your daughter's licensing process. You lied in your memoir. You obstructed ethics investigations. You did all of this proudly. She set down the notes. Those are your qualifications. That's your record. And somehow you're the Secretary of Homeland Security. Crockett pulled out statistics about DHS. You oversee 260,000 employees. You manage a $90 billion budget. You coordinate with intelligence agencies, law enforcement, and foreign governments. You're responsible for protecting America from terrorists, securing our borders, responding to disasters, and defending against cyber attacks. She looked at Noem. And you got this job because you shot a puppy to prove you were tough. Her voice got harder. Let me tell you what I see when I look at your record, Madam Secretary. I see someone who values cruelty over compassion. I see someone who lies when the truth would serve her better. I see someone who uses her power to benefit herself and her family. I see someone who attacks vulnerable communities without evidence. I see someone who lets people die rather than admit she was wrong. She pulled out one final document. This is the oath you took when you were sworn in as Secretary. I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and bear true faith and allegiance to the same. She looked up. But you can't even bear true faith to a puppy. You couldn't show allegiance to elderly people dying in nursing homes. You couldn't defend the tribal communities from your own attacks. Crockett stood up, something she hadn't done during the entire hearing. You called me a coastal elite who doesn't understand border security. Let me tell you what I understand, Madam Secretary. She pointed at the folders on the table. I understand that you shot a 14-month-old puppy instead of training it. I understand that you lied about meeting Kim Jong-un and Emmanuel Macron. I understand that you're banned from 5 tribal reservations in your own former state. I understand that South Dakota had the worst nursing home death rate in America under your leadership. I understand that you used your office to help your daughter cheat the licensing system. I understand that you auditioned for vice president by being cruel, failed, and got Homeland Security as a consolation prize. Her voice rose. I understand all of that perfectly. What I don't understand is how anyone thought you were qualified to protect the American people. She gathered all 7 folders. I'm a lawyer from Dallas. I was a public defender. I spent my career helping people who couldn't help themselves. I defended people the system wanted to throw away. I fought for people everyone else had given up on. She looked at Noem. I never shot a puppy. I never lied about meeting dictators. I never got banned from sovereign territory. I never let people die for my political brand. I never used my office to help my family cheat. I never did any of the things you've done. She paused. So, yes. I'm a coastal elite from Dallas, which is 800 miles from any coast. And I don't understand your version of border security, the one where you're banned from crossing borders. And I don't understand your version of toughness, the one where you shoot defenseless animals. Her final words were quiet but devastating. But I understand this, the American people deserve a Homeland Security Secretary who actually cares about protecting them. Who has experience and expertise. Who tells the truth. Who doesn't use their power to hurt people. She looked directly at the camera. You're not that person, Madam Secretary. You've never been that person. And as long as you're running Homeland Security, the homeland isn't secure. It's just run by someone who shoots puppies and calls it leadership. She sat down. Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time. The hearing room exploded. Applause from the gallery. Objections from Republicans. Democratic members nodding. Reporters sprinting out to file stories. C-SPAN's servers straining under the load. And Kristi Noem sat motionless, looking like someone who just watched their career die on live television. Share this with everyone who thinks Homeland Security requires competence, not cruelty. The hearing ended at 4:47 p.m. Eastern. By 4:48, Crockett was trending on Twitter. By 4:52, it was trending worldwide. By 5 o'clock, it was the #1 trend on every social media platform simultaneously. The congressional YouTube channel crashed within 10 minutes of the hearing ending. They'd never had that many people trying to watch a committee hearing ever. When they got the servers back up, the video already had 4.7 million views, and it had only been available for 30 minutes. TikTok became a war zone of Crockett clips. The coastal elite from Dallas, which is 800 miles from any coast, sound was used in 670,000 videos in the first 24 hours. Geography teachers used it. Comedians used it. Literally anyone who'd ever been called coastal when they lived in the middle of the country used it. But the sound that became a cultural phenomenon was the final line: the homeland isn't secure. It's just run by someone who shoots puppies and calls it leadership. Animal shelters used it in adoption campaigns. Veterinarians used it in PSAs about animal welfare. Dog trainers used it to explain behavioral training. And millions of people used it to express disgust with Noem's appointment. Within 48 hours, there were Crockett memorial accounts on every platform. At Justice for Crockett had 2.3 million followers. #Crockett Remembered was trending. Someone created an animated Crockett who commented on Noem's policies. It was simultaneously heartbreaking and devastating. The political fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Within 6 hours of the hearing, 3 Republican senators who'd voted to confirm Noem released statements saying they had concerns about recent revelations and calling for a renewed